The sound of clashing metal echoed in my mind as I sat frozen in my car, gripping the steering wheel tighter than I realized. My son's fencing tournament had hit a break, and while most parents were mingling inside the venue, I decided to head home for a quick breather. I needed the quiet, or so I thought. But quiet wasn't what I found. The sight hit me the moment I stepped out onto the patio, my polished leather shoes crunching against the stone. There they were, just a few feet away in the backyard. My wife, Angela, and Caleb, the fencing instructor I had hired for my son, standing far too close under the golden afternoon sun. The sound of their laughter was sharp and cutting, even over the rhythmic tapping of their practice foils. She lunged toward him, her posture surprisingly elegant for someone who claimed to have no interest in fencing. Caleb's hands guided her hips lightly, adjusting her stance with an ease that sent a chill down my spine. Their movements were intimate, synchronized in a way that no mere instructor-student relationship could explain. I stood there, unnoticed, my feet rooted to the patio as if the weight of the truth had physically anchored me. This wasn't just fencing practice, this was something deeper, something deliberate. A memory flashed through my mind. Just last week, Angela had gushed about how incredibly talented Caleb was. I had brushed it off as polite praise for someone helping our son succeed. But now, seeing them here together, I realized how blind I had been. The way she leaned into him, the casual way he touched her, it wasn't professional, it was betrayal. For weeks, maybe months, the signs had been there. Her sudden enthusiasm for attending our son's lessons, her late-night errands that always seemed to coincide with Caleb's schedule, the way she brushed off my questions with effortless charm. I had ignored them all, convinced that I was overthinking things. After all, why would she risk everything we had built? But now, as I stood there watching the scene unfold, there was no more room for doubt. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a coincidence. This was calculated, and I had walked right into it. The next morning, the house hummed with the usual chaos of tournament weekends. Our son, Ethan, was in the kitchen, furiously packing his fencing gear while muttering about forgetting his spare foil. Angela was seated at the counter, sipping her espresso, scrolling casually through her phone. She looked every bit the perfect wife and mother, poised, polished, and unbothered. "Did you get enough rest last night?" she asked, her tone light, almost cheerful. Her eyes didn't lift from the screen. I stared at her for a moment, my chest tightening as I replayed the scene from the backyard. The way Caleb had touched her, the way she had laughed with him. It was burned into my memory, an indelible mark I couldn't shake. "Yeah," I replied curtly, forcing my voice to sound neutral. "Did you?" She glanced up then, her smile practiced, effortless. "Of course, the tournament days are always exhausting, though, all the driving, you know." Her words were so normal, so casual, that for a moment I almost believed her. But then Ethan spoke up, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Or are you coming to practice today, Mom? Or are you staying with Caleb again?" My head snapped toward him, and for a brief second, Angela's composure faltered. She let out a nervous laugh, brushing her hair back in a way that felt too deliberate. "Ethan," she said, her tone forcedly playful, "Caleb was just showing me some moves to help you improve. I thought it might be fun to learn a little myself." Her explanation was smooth, calculated, but Ethan wasn't buying it. He shrugged, zipping his bag with an exaggerated tug. "Whatever. It's just weird, that's all." Weird. The word hung in the air, heavier than it should have been. Angela quickly redirected the conversation, asking him about his match schedule for the day. But I caught the slight tremor in her voice, the way she avoided my gaze as she spoke. I stayed silent, observing her. How many times had she used Ethan as an excuse, spinning her deceit into something noble? How often had I dismissed the small inconsistencies in her stories, choosing to trust her instead of confronting the nagging doubts in my mind? "Dad, can you drive me?" Ethan's voice pulled me from my thoughts. He was looking at me expectantly, his bag slung over one shoulder. "Sure," I said, grabbing my keys from the counter. "Let's get going." Angela stood, smoothing her dress as she set her empty cup in the sink. "I'll follow you in a bit," she said. "I need to take care of a few things here first." I nodded, hiding the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "Take your time." As Ethan and I walked to the car, I couldn't help but wonder what her few things entailed. Was Caleb waiting for her? Was she planning another lesson under the guise of helping Ethan succeed? The drive to the tournament was quiet, save for Ethan's occasional grumbles about his gear. My mind raced, piecing together every inconsistency, every suspicious moment I had ignored over the past few months. I needed answers, and I needed them soon. But for now, I had to play my role. The supportive father, the oblivious husband. Because if I confronted her too soon, she'd deny everything, and I wasn't going to give her that chance. Not this time. As Ethan disappeared into the chaos of the tournament hall, I found myself standing alone in the crowd of parents and coaches. The air was filled with the metallic clash of foils and the sharp, rhythmic buzz of scoring machines, but I could barely focus. My thoughts were elsewhere, on Angela, on Caleb, on the moments that had started to unravel my trust. I had always prided myself on being a rational man, someone who didn't jump to conclusions. But lately, there had been too many things I couldn't ignore. Angela's sudden interest in fencing, despite claiming she found the sport boring. Just a year ago. The late-night text notifications she always silenced without explanation. And then there were Caleb's lessons, always stretching far beyond their scheduled time, with Angela conveniently helping out. A memory surfaced from a month ago. Angela had insisted we hire Caleb for private lessons to give Ethan a competitive edge. At the time, it had seemed like a reasonable suggestion. Caleb was charismatic, skilled, and had an easy way of connecting with students. But now, I couldn't shake the feeling that her enthusiasm had less to do with Ethan's improvement and more to do with something or someone else. The sharp ping of my phone pulled me from my thoughts. A message from Angela. Running late. Be there soon. Good luck to Ethan. I stared at the text for a moment, my grip tightening on the phone. There was nothing inherently suspicious about it, but after what I'd seen in the backyard, everything felt like a lie. Hey, Monsieur? Taylor. A voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see one of the other parents, Mrs. Green, smiling warmly. Her son, Ann, was one of Ethan's teammates. Hello, I replied, forcing a polite smile. Is Angela here? She asked casually, glancing around the hall. I thought I saw her earlier with Caleb. My stomach dropped. With Caleb, I repeated, trying to keep my tone even. Yes, they were by the parking lot when I arrived. Looked like they were deep in conversation. I nodded, my jaw tightening as I processed her words. She said she'd be here soon, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Mrs. Green didn't seem to notice my tension. Well, tell her I said hi, she said with a smile before walking away. I stood there, my mind racing. So she was with Caleb. Again, my hands trembled as I slid my phone back into my pocket. The rational part of me wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation, that they were simply discussing Ethan's training. But the memory of their lesson in the backyard lingered, casting doubt over every plausible excuse. The tournament break was called soon after, and parents began to scatter. Ethan ran over, grinning from ear to ear. Dad, did you see my last point? I nailed that parry. I smiled, ruffling his hair. I did. Great job, buddy. Where's Mom? He asked, looking around. She's on her way, I said, my voice steady despite the storm building inside me. Probably stuck in traffic. Ethan nodded, too excited about his match to question it further. But I wasn't as easily placated. If she was with Caleb, then I needed to know. No more assumptions, no more doubts. As Ethan disappeared into the locker room, I pulled out my phone and opened the security camera app for our house. I rarely used it. I trusted Angela, or at least I had, but now it felt like the only way to get the answers I needed. I tapped into the backyard feed, and there they were. Angela and Caleb, standing close together near the patio. Her hand rested lightly on his arm as they laughed at something I couldn't hear. The scene felt like a punch to the gut. They weren't practicing fencing moves. They weren't even pretending. This was something else entirely. Something unmistakable. I clenched my jaw, my breath coming in shallow bursts as I watched the live feed. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was proof. The break was ending, and Ethan's next match was starting. I closed the app and slid my phone back into my pocket, my hands shaking. There was no time to act now. Not here. But I knew one thing for certain: this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The tournament dragged on, each match blurring into the next as my mind churned over what I'd seen on the security feed. Angela and Caleb, laughing together in our backyard while our son competed in a tournament meant to showcase his hard work. The audacity of it burned in my chest, threatening to unravel my composure. Ethan's next match ended in a victory, his cheers snapping me back to the present. I forced a smile and clapped along with the other parents, hiding the storm brewing inside me. He looked over, grinning ear to ear, and I waved, not letting my anger show. This moment was his, and I wouldn't let Angela's betrayal taint it, not yet. During another break, Ethan ran over, practically bouncing with excitement. "Dad, did Mom text? Is she here yet?" I hesitated, glancing at my phone. Nothing from her since the earlier, running late, message. "Not yet, buddy," I said, ruffling his hair. "She'll probably be here soon." He frowned slightly but shrugged it off. "I'm gonna go grab a snack," he said, jogging off toward the concession stand. As he disappeared into the crowd, I pulled out my phone and opened the security app again. The backyard feed loaded instantly, and the scene made my stomach twist. Caleb was still there, standing close to Angela near the patio table. She was gesturing animatedly, her body language far too comfortable, too familiar. He leaned toward her, saying something that made her laugh, a sound that used to be mine to hear. Then, as if to solidify my worst fears, she lightly touched his chest, letting her hand linger for a moment too long. My jaw clenched, the muscles in my neck tightening as I watched. I wanted to storm out of the tournament, drive straight home, and confront them both. But that wasn't the answer. Not yet. I needed more. I needed to ensure there was no room for denial, no chance for Angela to spin this into something innocent. The rest of the tournament passed in a haze. Angela never showed, and I made excuses for her absence, telling Ethan she was probably stuck running errands or handling something urgent. He nodded, too focused on his matches to dwell on it, but I saw the slight disappointment in his eyes. On the drive home, Ethan chatted nonstop about his matches, his excitement filling the car. I responded when I could, offering encouragement and praise, but my thoughts were elsewhere. My phone buzzed in the cuff holder, and I glanced at the screen. It was a message from Angela. "Sorry I couldn't make it. Something came up. Can't wait to hear how Ethan did. Something came up." The words made my blood boil. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, forcing myself to stay calm for Ethan's sake. I couldn't let him see how deeply her betrayal was cutting me. When we arrived home, Angela was in the kitchen, her back to us as she prepared dinner. She turned, flashing us both a bright smile, as if nothing had happened. "Hey, my favorite fencer," she exclaimed, pulling Ethan into a hug. "How'd it go?" "Great," Ethan said, his earlier disappointment forgotten in the warmth of her embrace. "I won 3 matches." "That's amazing," she said, ruffling his hair. "I'm so proud of you." I stood in the doorway, watching her closely. There was no hint of guilt in her expression, no sign that she had spent the afternoon entertaining Caleb instead of supporting her son. Her ability to switch between worlds so effortlessly made my stomach churn. As Ethan ran upstairs to unpack his gear, I stepped into the kitchen, my eyes fixed on her. She turned to me, her smile faltering slightly under my gaze. "Long day?" she asked, her voice light. "You could say that," I replied, my tone carefully controlled. "Ethan missed you today." Her expression softened, and she let out a small sigh. "I know. I feel terrible about not making it. But I'll make it up to him, I promise." I didn't respond, letting the weight of my silence hang between us. She turned back to the stove, stirring a pot of pasta sauce as if everything was perfectly normal. But I knew better. The cracks in her story were widening, and I was determined to expose the truth. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting Ethan, about confronting the lies that had infiltrated our family. I stepped out of the kitchen, my resolve hardening with every step. The next time she slipped up, I would be ready. The truth was coming, and there would be no escaping it. Dinner that night was a strained performance of normalcy. Ethan dominated the conversation, eagerly recounting every detail of his matches, from his victories to the close calls. Angela hung on his every word, smiling and nodding as though she had been there cheering him on. I played my part, asking questions and offering praise, but my mind was elsewhere, tangled in the chaos of what I'd seen that day. Angela's absence, her excuses, and her behavior with Caleb, it all felt like a growing weight pressing against my chest. As Ethan cleared his plate and headed upstairs, I found myself alone with her in the dimly lit dining room. She leaned back in her chair, sipping a glass of wine. "I'm so glad he had such a great day," she said, her voice warm. "You know how much fencing means to him." Her words grated against my nerves. I wanted to ask her what Caleb meant to her, but I bit my tongue, unwilling to let my emotions take control. Instead, I nodded, offering a noncommittal. "Yeah, he's really passionate about it." Her gaze flicked toward me, and for a moment, there was something unreadable in her expression. "Are you okay?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "You've been quiet tonight." "I'm fine," I said quickly, too quickly. Her eyes lingered on me for a moment longer before she took another sip of her wine. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. I could feel the questions clawing at the back of my mind, begging to be spoken. But I knew if I confronted her now, she'd deny everything. She was too practiced, too composed. I needed to stay one step ahead. "Caleb stopped by today," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. Her tone was casual, but her words hit me like a jolt. "Oh," I replied, feigning disinterest as I pushed my plate aside. "What for?" "He wanted to check on Ethan's footwork," she said, her explanation rehearsed, seamless. "You know how dedicated he is to helping him improve." I stared at her, searching for cracks in her story. "That's thoughtful of him," I said evenly, my voice betraying none of the anger simmering beneath the surface. She smiled, setting her glass down. "He really is. We're lucky to have someone so invested in Ethan's success." Her words hung in the air, dripping with irony. Lucky. I wanted to laugh, but the weight of my suspicion kept me silent. I needed to change the subject before my frustration boiled over. "I'm going to check on Ethan," I said, standing up. "Make sure he's getting ready for bed." She nodded, her smile unwavering. "Good idea. He's had a big day." As I climbed the stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew more than she let on. Her calm demeanor, her effortless lies. They were both infuriating and impressive. But I wasn't going to let her manipulate me. Not anymore. I knocked lightly on Ethan's door before stepping inside. He was sprawled on his bed, scrolling through his phone. "Hey, champ," I said, sitting on the edge of the mattress. "You feeling good about today?" He grinned, setting his phone aside. "Yeah, it was awesome." I smiled back, my chest tightening with a mix of pride and guilt. He deserved so much more than the deception that was creeping into our family. "I'm proud of you, buddy. You worked hard out there." "Thanks, Dad," he said, his eyes lighting up. "I just wish Mom could have seen it." His words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I kept my expression neutral. "She wanted to be there." I lied. "She just got caught up with something." Ethan nodded, his grin fading slightly. "She's been busy a lot lately." I ruffled his hair, ignoring the H in my chest. "She's doing her best, just like you are. Now, get some sleep. You've earned it." As I left his room and closed the door behind me, I felt the weight of the situation pressing down on me harder than ever. This wasn't just about me and Angela anymore. It was about Ethan, about the life we had built, and the lies that were threatening to tear it all apart. Back in my own room, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the darkness outside the window, the anger, the betrayal, the sadness. It all swirled together, making it hard to think clearly. But one thing was certain, I couldn't stay silent much longer. The truth was coming, whether Angela was ready for it or not. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. The weight of suspicion, the late-night spirals of doubt. It was all still there, but now it was accompanied by a single, undeniable truth. I couldn't keep pretending. I needed to act, to confront Angela, but I had to do it the right way, on my terms. She was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, pouring herself a second cup of coffee. She looked up and smiled as if everything were normal. "Morning," she said, her tone as casual as ever. "Did you sleep well?" I nodded, grabbing my own mug. "Well enough." Her eyes lingered on me for a moment, as if trying to gauge my mood. But I didn't give anything away. "What's on your agenda today?" she asked, sipping her coffee. "I've got a few calls this morning," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "What about you?" "Oh, just errands," she said breezily. "Grocery shopping, maybe a quick stop at the gym." Nothing exciting. I nodded again, my jaw tightening at the ease with which she lied. She probably thought I was oblivious, that I believed her every word. But today, I wasn't going to sit idly by. After breakfast, I pretended to head to my home office, but instead I grabbed my car keys and left the house, telling her I had a meeting at the office. She didn't ask questions, just kissed me on the cheek and waved me off. Her calm facade only fueled my determination. I parked a few blocks away and opened the security camera app on my phone, watching the live feed from our house. It didn't take long for her to appear in the frame. She was on the back patio, her phone pressed to her ear. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but her expression was telling. Relaxed, even happy. A stark contrast to the composed, slightly rushed Angela she had been at breakfast. Then, Caleb's truck pulled into the driveway. My chest tightened as I watched him step out, his confident swagger making my stomach churn. Angela greeted him at the patio door, her smile warm and familiar. They spoke briefly before she led him into the house, the door closing behind them. I clenched my phone, my breath shallow. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment I knew I would catch them in the act. But as much as I wanted to storm in right then, I held myself back. I needed more than just a confrontation. I needed undeniable proof. I drove back to the house, parking a few doors down. My heart pounded as I approached the side gate, careful not to make a sound. The patio doors were slightly ajar, and I could hear their voices drifting from the living room. I crouched low, peering through the gap in the curtains. They were sitting on the couch, closer than they had any reason to be. Caleb was leaning toward her, his hand resting casually on the back of the couch near her shoulder. Angela laughed softly at something he said, her hand brushing his arm in a gesture far too intimate to be innocent. I pulled out my phone and snapped a few photos, my hands trembling as I captured the scene. It wasn't much, but it was enough to confirm what I already knew. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was betrayal, plain and simple. My blood boiled, but I forced myself to stay calm. Storming in now would only give them the chance to deny it, to twist the narrative. I needed to make sure there was no escape, no room for doubt. Quietly, I stepped back and returned to my car. I opened my contacts and called the private investigator I had hired weeks ago. "I've got something," I said, my voice low. "They're at the house right now. Can you come by and set up the cameras we talked about?" "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he replied. I hung up, staring at the house from a distance. This wasn't just about catching them in the act. This was about taking control, about protecting my son and ensuring Angela couldn't manipulate her way out of the truth. The cameras would capture everything, their words, their actions, their lies. And when the time came to confront her, there would be no escape, no excuses. For now, all I could do was wait and prepare for the storm that was about to come. The private investigator arrived as planned, his car blending inconspicuously into the neighborhood. He carried a small case filled with discreet recording devices, cameras and microphones designed to capture everything without drawing attention. I led him to the side gate, where we quickly and silently worked to set up the equipment. "You'll get full coverage," he said in a low voice, securing a small camera near the patio door. "The audio feed will pick up conversations in the living room and kitchen, and the camera angles will give you clear visuals." I nodded, my jaw clenched as I glanced toward the house. The curtains were still drawn, but I could hear faint laughter through the open patio door. Angela and Caleb, oblivious to the world outside, were enjoying the comfort of my home while I stood in the shadows, planning their downfall. "Give it a couple of hours," the investigator said. "Once they're gone, you can review the footage. If there's anything you need me to do, just call." "Thanks," I muttered, my voice tight with restrained anger. As he left, I slipped back into my car and parked further down the street. The next 2 hours felt like an eternity. My phone buzzed once. "Angela, sending a casual text. Hope your meeting's going well. Ethan and I will be ready for dinner later, crew." The sheer audacity of it made my stomach churn. She had become so good at weaving her lies into the fabric of our lives that even her texts felt like part of a well-rehearsed play. Finally, Caleb emerged from the house. He looked relaxed, a satisfied grin on his face as he strolled to his truck. Angela appeared behind him, standing in the doorway with a playful smile. She leaned against the frame, watching him leave as if she were saying goodbye to an old friend. He waved and drove off, his truck disappearing down the street. I clenched the steering wheel, my knuckles white. The anger bubbling inside me felt volcanic, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the moment to confront her. Not yet. Once Caleb was gone, I returned to the house, acting as though nothing was amiss. Angela was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. She looked up when I entered, her smile bright and welcoming. "You're back early," she said casually. "How was your meeting?" "It went fine," I replied, my voice measured. "Good," she said, turning her attention back to the cutting board. "Ethan should be home soon. I thought we could all have a nice dinner together." I watched her for a moment, my mind replaying the scene I had just witnessed. The way she had smiled at Caleb, the easy familiarity between them. Her ability to switch roles so seamlessly, to act as though nothing had happened, was almost chilling. As Ethan arrived and we sat down for dinner, I played along, engaging in light conversation and masking the storm brewing inside me. Angela laughed at Ethan's stories and complimented his fencing performance, her tone warm and motherly. To anyone else, she would have seemed the picture of a devoted wife and mother. But I knew better. Later that night, when the house was quiet, I slipped into my study and reviewed the footage from the cameras. The images and audio were crystal clear. Angela and Caleb sitting close on the couch, their laughter filling the room as they shared stories and inside jokes. At one point, she leaned into him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. He didn't pull away. Instead, he smiled and brushed a strand of hair from her face, the gesture intimate and unmistakable. Then came the words that solidified everything. "I wish we didn't have to sneak around like this," Caleb said, his voice soft but clear. Angela sighed. "You know why we can't. Andrew would never forgive me, and I can't lose this lifestyle. He takes care of everything. Our house, Ethan's fencing, my expenses. I'd be stupid to give that up." Caleb chuckled. "You're a piece of work, you know that." She laughed lightly, leaning closer. "You don't seem to mind." The footage ended with Angela standing to see him out, the two of them sharing a lingering look at the door before he left. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling as the weight of her betrayal fully sank in. She wasn't just unfaithful. She was calculating, using me to fund her lifestyle while entertaining a relationship with someone else. The anger I had been suppressing for weeks now threatened to boil over. I sat in the dark, the truth undeniable. The evidence was there, laid bare in cold, hard reality. There would be no excuses, no lies she could spin to escape this. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, I prepared myself for the storm to come, the confrontation that would finally expose her for who she truly was. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. The footage replayed in my mind, Angela's words echoing like a siren. "I can't lose this lifestyle." She didn't love me, not anymore. I wasn't her husband, I was her financial safety net. But today, she would face the consequences of every lie, every deceitful smile, every calculated betrayal. I waited until Ethan had left for school, his cheerful goodbye tugging at my heart. He deserved better than this, better than growing up in a home built on a foundation of lies. Once he was gone, I made my move. Angela was in the living room, scrolling through her phone with her coffee in hand. She looked up as I entered, offering me her practiced smile. "You're home late this morning," she said casually. "Yeah," I replied, my tone flat. "We need to talk." The shift in my voice must have given something away because her smile faltered. "About what?" she asked, setting her mug on the coffee table. "About Caleb," I said, my words deliberate and pointed. Her eyes widened, and for the first time, she seemed genuinely caught off guard. "Caleb," she repeated, forcing a laugh. "What about him?" I didn't answer. Instead, I walked to my laptop sitting on the dining table and opened the video file. I turned the screen toward her and pressed play. The living room was filled with the sound of her laughter, her voice clear and undeniable. Angela sat frozen, her face draining of color as the footage played on. Caleb's words, her confessions, the damning intimacy of their interactions. It was all there, irrefutable and devastating. "I wish we didn't have to sneak around like this," Caleb's voice said. Angela's voice followed, trembling but laced with certainty. "You know why we can't. Andrew would never forgive me, and I can't lose this lifestyle." I paused the video, letting the weight of her words hang in the air. Her mouth opened and closed like she was trying to find something to say, but nothing came out. "Well," I said, my voice sharp and demanding, "do you have anything to say for yourself?" She finally managed to speak, her voice trembling. "Andrew, it's not what it looks like. Don't, I snapped, cutting her off. Don't insult me with excuses. I've seen enough, heard enough. You've been lying to me, using me, while sneaking around with him. Tears welled in her eyes, but they didn't move me. I didn't mean for this to happen, she stammered. I never wanted to hurt you. Never wanted to hurt me, I said, my voice rising. You've been betraying me in my own home, using my money to fund your little charade while pretending to be the perfect wife. Do you think I'm stupid? Her tears spilled over as she shook her head. Andrew, please. Stop, I said firmly, my anger bubbling over. You don't get to cry and play the victim here. You've destroyed this marriage, this family. And for what? A fling with the fencing instructor. It wasn't just a fling, she blurted out before clapping her hand over her mouth, as though realizing her mistake. The room fell silent, the weight of her words crashing down like a tidal wave. I stared at her, the woman I had spent years building a life with, and saw nothing but a stranger. I see, I said finally, my voice cold and steady. So it wasn't just a fling. It was worth destroying everything. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Andrew, please, she begged. I'll stop. I'll end it. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Just don't leave me. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Fix this? You think this is something you can fix? You've shattered every ounce of trust we had. And now you want to fix it because you're afraid of losing the life you built on my back. Her tears turned into sobs, her words coming out in fragmented pleas. I made a mistake. I was lonely. You were always working, and No, I interrupted, my voice firm. You don't get to blame me for your choices. I worked to provide for this family, to give us a good life. And this is how you repay me. She fell to her knees, clutching at my leg. Please, Andrew, I love you. I'll do anything. Just give me another chance. I stepped back, her grip slipping away. You don't love me, I said, my voice calm but resolute. You love what I can give you. And now, you'll have to figure out how to live without it. I turned and walked away, her sobs echoing behind me. This wasn't just the end of our marriage. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I reclaimed my life from the lies that had suffocated it. I wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was certain: Angela's charade was over, and I wasn't looking back. The house was eerily quiet the rest of the day. Angela stayed in the living room, her sobs reduced to quiet sniffles as I locked myself in my office. The anger that had carried me through the confrontation began to subside, replaced by a heavy, crushing weight. It wasn't just anger or betrayal I felt, it was grief. Grief for the life we'd built, for the years we'd spent together, for the family I thought we had. I opened the laptop again and played the footage, this time with no anger, just cold detachment. The words were the same, but now they landed differently. Her tone, the casual way she discussed her betrayal, her calculated reasoning for staying, it all painted a picture of someone I barely recognized. This wasn't the woman I had married. Or maybe, I thought bitterly, this was who she had always been, and I had been too blind to see it. I stared at the screen for a long time, my thoughts turning to Ethan. How could I tell him? How could I explain what his mother had done without tearing his world apart? He adored her, and for all her flaws, she was still his mother. But the thought of continuing this charade, pretending everything was fine for his sake, made my stomach churn. He deserved the truth, at least some of it. As the hours dragged on, I heard Angela moving around the house. Occasionally, she would knock on the office door, her voice small and pleading. Andrew, please, can we talk? Each time, I ignored her, letting the silence speak for me. By evening, the silence was broken by the sound of Ethan's voice as he came through the front door, his cheerful energy cutting through the tension like a knife. Dad! Mom! I'm home! He called, dropping his bag by the door. I emerged from the office, forcing a smile. Hey, buddy! How was school? It was good, he said, his grin fading slightly as he looked between me and Angela. What's wrong? You guys look weird. Angela stepped forward, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed. Nothing's wrong, sweetheart, she said quickly, her voice trembling. Your dad and I just had a little disagreement. Everything's fine. I clenched my jaw, biting back the urge to contradict her. This wasn't the time, not with Ethan standing there, looking at us with a mixture of confusion and concern. Well, why don't you go upstairs and get started on your homework? I said, keeping my tone steady. I'll come up in a bit to help if you need it. He hesitated, his eyes flicking between us, but eventually nodded. Okay, he said slowly, grabbing his bag and heading up the stairs. As soon as he was out of earshot, Angela turned to me, her voice urgent. Andrew, please. I know I've made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can. No, I said, cutting her off. We can't. You've destroyed any chance of that. Her eyes filled with tears again. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose our family. You should have thought about that before you betrayed us, I said coldly. This isn't just about me. It's about Ethan. He deserves better than this. She flinched, her tears spilling over. I'll do whatever it takes, she whispered. Therapy, counseling, whatever you want. Just don't give up on us. I shook my head, my voice firm. It's too late for that, Angela. You didn't just cheat on me. You used me. You stayed for the lifestyle, not because you cared about me or our family. That's not something you can fix with a few therapy sessions. Her sobs grew louder, but I turned away, heading up the stairs to check on Ethan. When I entered his room, he was sitting at his desk, pretending to work on his math homework, but clearly distracted. Hey, kiddo, I said softly, sitting on the edge of his bed. You okay? He turned to me, his brow furrowed. Is something wrong with you and Mom? He asked hesitantly. You've been acting weird lately. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. Your mom and we've been having some problems, I admitted. But no matter what happens, we both love you. That will never change. He nodded slowly, his eyes searching mine for reassurance. Are you going to get a divorce? He asked bluntly. The question hit me like a punch to the gut, but I didn't flinch. We're figuring things out, I said honestly. But whatever happens, I promise you'll always have both of us in your life. He seemed to accept that, nodding again before turning back to his homework. I stayed with him for a while, helping him with a few math problems, but my mind was elsewhere. That night, I sat in the darkened living room, the weight of the day pressing down on me. Angela had retreated to the guest room, leaving the house eerily silent. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be difficult conversations, painful decisions, and moments when I'd question everything. But one thing was clear, this chapter of my life was coming to an end. And as painful as it was, I knew it was the only way forward. The days that followed were some of the hardest I'd ever faced. The house felt like a battlefield, every glance between Angela and me heavy with unspoken words, every interaction with Ethan a delicate balancing act. The life we had built was crumbling, and there was no salvaging it. I spent hours with my attorney, gathering the evidence I needed to ensure a clean break. The videos, the financial records, and Angela's own admissions formed an airtight case. It wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting myself and Ethan, about ensuring we could move forward without the shadows of deceit looming over us. Angela tried to reason with me, her pleas alternating between desperate apologies and angry accusations. You're throwing away everything, she screamed one night, her voice cracking with emotion. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. No, I said calmly, my voice steady despite the storm in hers. You made choices, Angela, and those choices have consequences. The divorce papers were served a week later. Angela's reaction was predictably dramatic. Tears shouting, and then silence. She signed them eventually, her hands shaking as she scribbled her name on the dotted line. There was no fight for custody. She knew Ethan would choose to stay with me. Her love for him was genuine, but even that couldn't undo the damage she had caused. Breaking the news to Ethan was one of the most painful moments of my life. I sat him down in the living room, Angela sitting across from us, her face pale and drawn. Ethan, I began, my voice soft but firm. Your mom and I have decided to get a divorce. His face fell, his eyes darting between the two of us. Why? He asked, his voice trembling. I glanced at Angela, silently urging her to speak. She hesitated, then said, Sometimes adults grow apart. Sweetheart, but we both love you very much and that will never change. It was a sanitized version of the truth, one that spared him the full weight of what had happened. He nodded slowly, tears brimming in his eyes. I don't want you to get divorced, he whispered. I pulled him into a hug, my heart breaking as his tears soaked into my shirt. I know, buddy, but we're going to make sure you're okay. You'll always have us, no matter what. The weeks turned into months, and slowly, we began to rebuild. I moved into a smaller house, one that felt like a fresh start. Ethan adjusted better than I expected, throwing himself into his fencing training. I made sure to be there for every tournament, cheering him on from the sidelines, no longer distracted by doubts and suspicions. As for Angela, she moved into an apartment across town. She tried to maintain a presence in Ethan's life, and I encouraged it, for his sake. But our interactions were brief and businesslike, the warmth between us extinguished. One evening, as I sat on the porch of my new home, watching Ethan practice his footwork in the yard, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. The air was crisp, the sun casting long shadows across the grass, and for the first time I felt like I could breathe again. The betrayal had hurt, deeply, but it hadn't broken me. I had faced it, endured it, and come out the other side stronger. Life wasn't what I had envisioned, but it was mine to rebuild. Ethan glanced over, grinning. "Watch this, Dad," he called, executing a perfect lunge. I smiled, clapping for him. "That's my boy!" As he continued practicing, I leaned back in my chair, letting the moment wash over me. The road ahead wouldn't be without challenges, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. The lies were behind me, and the future was mine to shape, one honest step at a time.